open and in public session? Okay, thank you. So, after our tour of Myola, Northern Ireland Water Treatment Works there, which was really, really interesting and useful, just going to provide an overview of today's business. So the committee will receive oral evidence on capacity constraints within wastewater systems in Northern Ireland and Lough Neagh issues from Northern Ireland Water. We're going to consider written updates on the residents' parking review and the part-time 20-mile-per-hour speed limits at schools review of initiatives after Tranche 1 and 2. So inform those that are in attendance in the public gallery. You can use your mobile phone devices if you are connected to a Wi-Fi connection. All devices should be muted. 3G, 4G and 5G should not be used, and there are no recordings or photographs to be taken of the meeting. If members are content, we're going to proceed through the agenda as follows. We have apologies from Peter McReynolds and Danny Baker. Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest to remind members that they are obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests which might reasonably be thought by others to influence their approach to the matter under consideration. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the particular matter arises in the meeting. So does any member have any interest that they wish to declare? I just want to declare that I do have family members that work within NI Water. Okay, chairperson's business. Yesterday I had a meeting with the Financial Conduct Authority. We met with them to discuss issues in relation to motor insurance in Northern Ireland, which, as we know, is a big issue here. Unfortunately, the chairpersons of the Economy and Justice Committee were unable to attend. The representatives that we met outlined a number of reasons for the high cost of motor insurance, which is stated are generic across the UK, including how easy it is to actually steal cars and the cost of outsourcing claims to management company. The personal injury discount rate and the size of the market here may also have an impact on prices in Northern Ireland, and that was around, I did question around those things as well. So the terms of reference for the task force announced by the government are still being worked out, but the representatives advised that the Secretary of State and the Northern Ireland office officials have been invited to join, and they believe that the Finance Minister may also be invited. So I'm just informing members that the SCA also had an undertaken, or is also undertaking a number of reviews, for example, on the claims and accident management companies, which it expects to report on in 2025, so we'll be looking out for that as a committee. The FCA will keep the committee updated on this work and have offered to meet with the committee whenever more information is available on the specific issues relating to Northern Ireland. So I'm just asking members at this stage if you're content that whenever we do have that further information that we request an oral evidence session from FCA at an appropriate date in the future. Would members be content with that?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. Item 4 is the draft minutes. At page 7, you'll see draft minutes of proceedings of the meeting on the 6th of November 2024. I'm seeking agreement that members are content that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection of the meeting on the 6th of November 2024. If so, I will then sign the minutes. Content? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, the joint meeting of the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. You'll see at page 3 of the table papers the draft minutes of the concurrent meeting with the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs held yesterday, which was the 12th of November 2024. There is a slight amendment. Nicola Brogan left the meeting at 10:49. So subject to those amendments, I'm just seeking agreement that members are content that the minutes are a true and accurate reflection of the meeting on the 12th of November. If you're content with that, I will sign the minutes once they have been considered and agreed by the ERA Committee. Content with that? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Item 5 is matters arising at page 9 of the table papers. Minister for Infrastructure, A5 Western Transport Corridor. I'm informing members that the Minister has advised of a potential legal challenge to the decision to proceed with the A5 Western Transport Corridor. At the minute, we have no further information or comment that is available at this stage. Obviously, we are disappointed with that, but I'm sure we will have information at a later date. So I'm asking members if they're content to note the correspondence at this moment in time.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Item 6 is correspondence. At page 19, you'll see the correspondence memo. At page 43, item 6.3, you'll see correspondence from BT Group PLC responding to the draft programme for government 2024-2027. I suggest that the committee also seeks information from DFI for its view on the conversion of BT street furniture to EV charging points and how this could be facilitated through the planning system, and also for comment on the issues raised regarding the time taken to assess planning applications for mobile technology and how this compares to other jurisdictions. Are members content with that? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, at page 11 of table papers, you'll see the Minister for Finance oral statement, October monitoring. Advise members that the statement indicates that the Executive agreed a resource to capital DEL switch for the Department of Justice and for the NI Road Safety Partnership. So I'm seeking agreement to ask the Department of Justice for clarification on the reasons for the switch from resource to capital DEL and the amount involved. Are members content with that? Mark, do you want to raise something?
Very much so. It would be on the same item, Chair, and you might have been coming there anyway, but it's just, we know what DFI has been awarded. We see in the correspondence pack what it had bid for, but what is the money awarded? Do you know which bids is that for or associated with?
Okay.
Chair, I think it's actually general allocation that's been awarded.
That's the resource, the capital of 39 million, and it will be including wastewater infrastructure, but is that general as well?
I think that there was an overcommitment in capital for the department, so I think it might be to go against that, but if members wish, we can ask the department to clarify exactly what they plan to use the resource and capital for.
Yeah, I think the overcommitment was related to the A5.
Not sure we can get it fenced.
Yeah, that was ring fence funding for the A5.
Yeah. So, but if we could just ask clarity.
Yeah, we'll get clarity in relation to it anyway. Okay, any other points that members want to raise on that? Okay. Any other items that members wish to comment or raise an issue on, and any other item of correspondence that's there in the pack? No? Okay. So I'm seeking agreement that members are content to note the correspondence and the remaining suggested actions as contained in the correspondence memo in the pack. Yeah? Okay. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move to our evidence session. So item 7 is capacity constraints within the wastewater systems in Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland Water are going to give us oral evidence today. At page 47, you'll see the clerk's memo. At page 52, you'll see Northern Ireland Water written evidence. At page 70, you'll see correspondence from the Royal Society of Ulster Architects detailing projects that have been impacted by wastewater constraints. At page 82, you'll see written evidence from Marek Design and She Consulting on behalf of NI Wastewater Engineers. At page 93, you'll see the extract from Utility Regulator, PC21 Mid-Term Review, Final Determination Report. At page 103, you'll see the waste treatment process provided by NI Water. And at page 106, you'll see the official report of the oral evidence session with Construction Employment Federation and Royal Society of Ulster Architects. So, welcome to today's meeting, Sara Venning, Chief Executive of Northern Ireland Water, and Ronan Larkin, Director of Finance from Northern Ireland Water. You're very welcome. we're here in your patch today, but you're very welcome to our committee meeting again to provide us with some evidence. So I'm seeking agreement from members that the evidence is recorded by Hansard. All agreed? Yeah. Okay, so we do obviously have quite substantial evidence. I'm aware that you do have a PowerPoint presentation, so members have that as well in their pack. So if you wouldn't mind just briefly for about 5 minutes, if you could, run through your PowerPoint presentation, and then I'm keen to come to members' questions then after that. Thank you.
Okay, I think it might take a wee bit longer than the 5 minutes, but I think that part of the, I suppose, the beauty and the benefit of us chatting through hopefully will address a number of those questions. Look, in terms of the tour this morning, I hope that you found it both interesting and reassuring in relation to water quality and the work that we in NI Water are all doing to make sure that the drinking water that we supply to our customers is safe at all times. And we were really heartened to see the committee's interest to actually come out to a water treatment work. So thank you very much for that. And as you've said, Chair, we have a few slides to guide the conversation. We thought we would recap at the outset on the work that we've done to ensure that despite the raw water quality issues in Lough Neagh, we can continue to produce drinking water across our 4 treatment works that have Lough Neagh as an abstraction source to the highest quality. And then we do turn our focus to wastewater to recap on the reasons behind why there are capacity constraints. And the committee will understand that in Northern Ireland, water, in conjunction with all the relevant partner organisations, there is a remediation plan that will focus on wastewater infrastructure, and that plan is called PC21, and you mentioned the utility regulator. So we recap for the committee where we are up to at the PC21 midpoint and what the independent utility regulator has concluded in its review. So the fact that we have a remediation plan is really positive, but it is only effective if that plan is funded. So we'll share with the committee the funding information as we understand it and the associated impact of that. And I guess then at the end we probably say to ourselves, well, how do we take this forward? So look, if we move on to the Lough Neagh piece, and you probably want me to skip through this one quite quickly if you go to the next one down. As I said to some of you on the way round, so when the initial blue-green outbreak happened in Lough Neagh in 2023, right across NI Water, we started working internally and with our external partners to make sure that we were doing everything we possibly could to mitigate the impact any blooms would have on drinking water quality. And we cannot find an alternative source for this 40% plus of our drinking water, so this work's really important. And you've now seen for yourselves the treatment processes and the multi-layered barriers that at each stage of the process purify that water. So we focused on making sure that those stages are as effective as they possibly can be. We've put in place additional measures to sample the water, to test the water, to provide feedback to customers, and we've been sharing all that good work with our customers, both through social media, ordinary media and face-to-face. And by way of further reassurance, work has already commenced in relation to the 2025 season. So look, if we move on to the body of what we wanted to talk about today, which was wastewater. As an infrastructure committee, you're all acutely aware that infrastructure, I think the Chair said this to me, is a key enabler for many of the desired outcomes of a modern society. So whether that's public health, whether that's economic growth, or nature and biodiversity. And you can see that within the actual programme for government, which is reaching its consultation phase. In recent months, though, and weeks, and your correspondence reflects this committee has had several submissions that are highlighting deficiencies in Northern Ireland's wastewater infrastructure and the impact that that's having on nature and on the economy. So Ronan and I would be happy to share with you this morning our understanding of the current situation and how we would aim to be part of a joined-up resolution to that. So keep that. You'll have seen our past presentations, and we have told you in the past we treat 350 million litres of wastewater a day at over 1,000 wastewater treatment plants. That comes to us along a pipe network that is 16,000 kilometres long. And as citizens, we've all become aware of a part of the sewer network that we never talked about before called storm overflows. and how they work and operate to prevent out-of-sewer flooding in people's homes and in people's businesses. But what is equally well documented here in Northern Ireland is that the wastewater network and the treatment infrastructure for decades now has been subject to underinvestment. And so therefore it is simply undersized to convey to the size it needs to be to convey and treat what we have. And that means there are higher levels of spills to the environment. And it's this environmental impact of those underinvested assets that was understood back in 2007 when NI Water was formed. And at that time, a regulatory dispensation was put in place so that the higher environmental standards could be levied once the assets had been invested in and were fit to meet those standards. And that dispensation should have been a short-term mitigation measure, and it was there to provide the breathing space for the wastewater investment programme. But unfortunately, that investment programme was not included in successive business plans until the PC21 plan. And that plan has significant investment in wastewater, as well as the ambition to be ready for higher environmental standards by 2027. So, whilst on the face of it, Northern Ireland needs to protect its water courses, so to reduce the level of nutrients that is in that raw water, as you've seen happen this summer, we have to tackle that. So the way to do that is by making sure we do not further overload the wastewater infrastructure. And that means limiting or stopping connections to an undersized network. And it is that necessary action that is impacting on Northern Ireland's ability to build new homes and connect new businesses. So the committee will have had evidence in the past around our plans to work with developers to create some capacity whilst our investment programme got up and running. So we had a plan, it would take a few years to get up and running, and in the interim we've been able to create some of that capacity quite successfully, albeit, and members have called that out to us, it placed more burden in terms of cost on developers. And those initiatives resulted in solutions being identified that, if they are implemented by developers, would enable up to 18,000 homes, properties to be built and to connect. Now, build rates are diminishing, but this is probably about 3 years breathing space if the developers feel that it is viable to spend that money. Our work with developers then has identified a further 19,000 properties that they want to build that require capital intervention on NI Water assets. And the type of investment that is needed in most instances is really quite substantial. So we have no line of sight now to that investment anymore, and therefore those properties are unable to go forward at the present time. There's been much talk of developers' contributions, and they can help in some instances, but not routinely. And in general, they don't address the underlying issue, which is the environmental safeguarding that has to be put in place. So, as a committee, again, you'll be aware that the utility regulator for Northern Ireland has oversight and a scrutiny role in relation to our investment plans. And as part of that process, they carried out a mid-term review for the PC21 plan. And that review was carried out because when we made our original submission, and we would have been doing that work as far back as 1819, not all the costs were certain. And so the review was to scrutinise the more accurate costs that we had brought together. So, in considering any business plan submission, a regulatory authority like the utility regulator has a duty to make sure that that plan has sufficient resource cover so that our services can be provided to customers. So they have to make sure that those resources are in place from our shareholder, in essence. And they get their policy guidance around what are the minimum levels of standard from the DFI social and environmental guidance. Now, their review concluded that the work that we said we needed to do during PC21 still requires to be done. But in the time between us submitting the plan and the review being carried out, we've all seen significant inflation, not least in relation to our energy costs. So that mid-term review recognised that, and it allowed for an additional £180 million in operating costs in the last 3 years of the plan. And the review also recognised higher input prices in the capital world, in our capital investments, and it set out that at least 2.4 billion would be the minimum level of investment that was necessary in capital works. And there was a commitment to do further work to identify the additional impact of inflation across a range of areas in that capital plan. So the UR have been very clear that the company's capital need is likely to increase, and it is our own view that that increase will take the plan to some £2.7 billion. So I'm going to hand you over now to Ronan to talk a wee bit about the mismatch that we are currently experiencing between the investment need and the funding allocation.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you. And good morning, committee. Thank you. So Sarah talked about the capital piece there as well, and the capital allocations that are required, and the regulator's review on that just completed in recent weeks, and published in recent weeks. And I guess that, one of the immediate concerns that we have, and what we want to make sure the committee's up to speed with this as well, is that actually right now in this current year, 24-25, there is a gap, quite a significant gap, which means that we don't have enough money in Ordale in the funding to keep the business running all the way through the winter period. So that's the sewage piece particularly, and we'll come to why that might be sewage particularly. If I just look at the text on the left-hand side of the slide, the revenue funding gap is £23 million out of £160 million Ordale need that we have this year. And we do deem that cost to be essential. That is essential costs, and I'll come to why I describe that as essential. We cannot stop spending and using the money to run the services without a consequence to either water and the already struggling and overwhelmed wastewater services systems. It just is impossible to say, take out 23 million and then run them to best effect. They're already struggling, and we can't do that. So there is no way that we can reduce that spend and close that gap by ourselves and still provide those services. And often there are questions sometimes about efficiency. Is Northern Ireland Water an efficient company? It's a good question. People should ask that. That should be asked at all times. Okay, is an efficient company? Is it doing all it can to be efficient? We have no issue with that question being asked. We actually get an independent assessment done of that by the utility regulator. So the good news for government here, for the shareholder, for the owner, for the stakeholders, for customers, is that it's one thing us saying we're efficient, but when somebody independent of us takes a look at our planning, takes a look at where we spend the money, how we run the service, benchmarks us against other parts of the United Kingdom and these islands, and then they say we're efficient. We've closed the efficiency gap since we went live in 2007, pretty much. There was a gap of just under 50%. So Northern Ireland was running a company, an organisation that provided the water and waste services back then in 2007, that was 50% less efficient than the benchmarks across the UK, the utility regulators' benchmarks. So that meant back then, for every pound that was being spent on these services in England and Wales, Northern Ireland was spending £2. Now, that gap has pretty much been closed right now, and that gap sits at just under 6% now, which is deemed as a closed gap, because some of the things that we would want to do may not be possible within a government ownership model. The model might prevent us from doing some of these things here in Northern Ireland, and we have to recognise that, and those are parts of that, the dynamic here for us. But that would show that we are an efficient water and wastewater company. And if I go to the graphic on the right-hand side of the slide, we had looked at the beginning of this year thinking we might need £176 million of DALE, of resource DALE, to run the business from government. And we said we would start the year and examine where we could continue to drive efficiencies and take costs out. We knew that some of the costs were variable. Things like energy costs are just moving around with all the geopolitical issues that are going on in the world. Now, in the October monitoring round, we had managed to take 176 down to 160 million. So we think we need 160 million of resource DALE for operating costs this full year, 24-25. The department, because of the constraints it has upon it, DFI, it says we can only give you £137 million. So that's a £23 million gap. And in the PC21 midterm review, the bar on the right hand, the blue bar on the right hand side, the regulator's midterm review said we should determine to use about £171 million to run the services. Northern Ireland Water has got it down to £160 million. We cannot get it down to £137 million without breaking the wastewater service this winter. And we've really got, I think, the line there, we must find a way to break out. We're describing this as a very perilous kind of downward spiral. Northern Ireland has to find a way to come away from this. because we want the services to run. You will all want these services to run for your constituents during the winter period particularly, and into next year and the year after that as well, and the year after that. So we find ourselves in the situation where there's a gap of £23 million between what we need to run the service and what's available for us to run the service. That's just on the operating side. Sara has described the capital piece there as well. So the next slide then will take us back into capital for a bit, and Sara touched on this. The PC21 plan was a plan that we said we would set in place. It was determined by the regulators. They approved it and said, get off and do the plan. And that would begin to address years of wastewater underfunding in Northern Ireland, which is having a significant impact on the economy here and on the environment. And if you look at the chart itself, I described that was our plan. So the graphic shows that the shape of the capital programme for the current 6-year price control PC21, and we're now in year 4 of that price control. Just where the large brown piece at the top of the graph starts to kind of take off and really grow. That's when the investment really starts to come in the plan. So year 4 and year 5 and year 6 would see intense capital spend and investment on the assets, particularly on wastewater, to start to alleviate some of the stresses and strains on the wastewater network and the impact that's having on customers. In that 4th year, the utility regulator determined in the plan that we would need to invest $590 million, and that's before the mid-term review piece that Sara was describing. So we would need that £590 million to do the schemes that we have to do this year. You'll know that from the graphic itself, that piece around wastewater really kicks up in that 4th year. This year, we're being allocated £321 million against the £590 million need, and that's a gap of £266 million, or something like a shortfall of about 45% against what we need. So the schemes and the investment that we were all describing, and that we know that you as a committee are keen to understand what's happening with, and want to know why can that not go forward. The issue is that there's a gap in available funding, and we cannot begin those schemes and get those schemes underway without that funding to go in place.
Sorry to interrupt. I know that there's quite a bit to get through, and I'm keen to come to members' questions because we have seen in terms of some of the slides. So if you wouldn't mind, just
we'll keep pushing
briefly
that. Yep.
touch on the rest of the slides, and then we can come to members' questions. Would that be okay?
If you look at the next slide on here now, the very large block at the top, the unfunded PC21 wastewater recovery, that's what that looks like now for the end of the price control. For the last 3 years of the price control, we won't be able to invest to the extent that anyone needs to in Northern Ireland. So the large investment goes from that big block at the top to a much smaller block, which is not able to meet the needs of the population here in Northern Ireland and the needs of the plan with the regulator. So that investment shortfall will continue to kick up to possibly up to towards £1 billion over the period ahead. The next slide, and I'll use this as a headline. So the Belfast Living with Water programme is likely to be a casualty of the investment here. So the programme around Greater Belfast, where we had the Living with Water programme, that was a programme endorsed by a previous Executive Assembly. That is now pretty much on hold at this stage, and there's significant interest in the state of Belfast Lough and what that might mean for the ecosystem that is Belfast Lough, and for the economy in Belfast, and for the ambitious growth plans that Belfast and Northern Ireland has for its first city. I guess without the funding, then we cannot really fulfil our role in the River Basin Management Plan, and this is the plan that's put in place to examine the state of the receiving waters and what our waters look like in Northern Ireland in terms of how clean, or they're a healthy state or a poor state. We really can't, without the funding, we can't fulfil our role as part of the group that will fix that in Northern Ireland, and that's a major issue for us. And there's renewed interest now from the Office for Environmental Protection starting to come around, examining where Northern Ireland is against its plan and what it's doing about that and what that investment looks like. The next price control we call PC27, and we're starting to think away into that now, because in order to run these long-term investment programmes and run this long-term sector, we have to start thinking ahead. We can't wait to the year that's upon us to get into thinking about what we do. But PC27 is really going to be, the first half is going to be about catching up on the stuff that we haven't been able to do and was deferred from PC21 because of issues around funding. And then we will also need approximately £200 million to start addressing the climate commitments that are now built into and baked into Northern Ireland's net zero commitments. And on the way around this morning, members were asking me what happens to sludge, wastewater sludge, and we'll need £180 to £200 million for new sludge disposal processes and facilities when we get to 2032 as well. The current contract that looks after those will be replaced with something different, and that will take I think upwards towards £200 million. So equally, we've been asked to take a look at the PC21 from a continuum of £321 million. It simply won't cut the mustard. £321 million will not be enough to invest in what's needed for this price control, let alone the next price control. But if we were looking at a planning horizon at the moment, the sense is that we're being asked or instructed to say, look at £321 million for the funding horizon. Now, I know that can change. That may change because we're not into that period yet. But the regulator will determine an independent plan, and we would strongly contend that the plan that we would need to put in place and the plan that the regulator is likely to determine on will be significantly above £321 million capital investment each year. So the problem that we're facing today in Northern Ireland around constraints, capacity constraints, network constraints, the ability to provide the service, to build houses, to grow the economy and so on, that situation, if that prevails into PC27, is only going to get worse. That problem is going to be with Northern Ireland for a very, very long time.
So look, two very quick messages then from me. Why, lots of numbers there, and you can get bamboozled with the numbers. Why are we doing this? 38% of Northern Ireland's watercourses are classified as good status. There's a target to get to 70% good status by 2027. The Office of Environmental Protection have said that that is unachievable. If we do not invest in wastewater infrastructure, and you've seen from the previous slides, there's likely to be no investment, then there will be no improvement in water quality driven by the publicly owned water utility. And that will be in stark contrast to what's happening in the rest of the UK and across Europe. I think all our consciousnesses have been awakened as citizens now to the importance of the environment, and standards are rising. The NIEA has a wastewater regulation reform programme, and they are signalling more stringent standards. So higher standards are good, but they are only good if you can meet them. And currently, if you cut the investment in the wastewater assets, new environmental commitments cannot be met, and they won't lead to improved water quality. So we find ourselves back in a conversation where we started, and where you want to talk about is the only action open to us is to prevent connections to the wastewater network, which we have all heard is already starting to hit architects and the construction industry. So if you want to go on. And look, I don't want the overarching impression of you guys to be one of doom and gloom from us and from NI Water. There is much to be positive about. So the water utility is publicly owned. Clear plans have been developed that will allow us, over a long-term programme, to effect the improvements in the infrastructure that will deliver for the environment and that will deliver for the economic growth. So that work is the hard part, and that's been done. And not only have the plans been developed, they have been checked for value for money. But the plans are now being undermined, and the necessary infrastructure investment programme is currently paused. It's not happening, and there is an urgent need for additional funding through monitoring rounds just to meet the basic running costs. So not capital, so we're not even talking about capital costs. At the minute, we can't even meet the basic running costs. And I think everyone here, I've heard you all say it, long-term infrastructure-intensive businesses need a stable and sustainable investment profile. Short-term injections of cash are welcome, but they don't provide the most efficient or effective vehicle for delivering the aims of the executive. So, look, the challenge, I think, and the opportunity is how do we work together? How does the executive work together to identify how best to secure that longer-term surety going forward? And I think, listening to all the evidence, it would seem that we really can't afford not to find a way through that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I'm very keen to come to members' questions. We've quite a few members that do want to ask questions, so I wouldn't mind just if you could briefly and concisely sort of speak to the questions that have been raised by members. I just want to kick off in relation to the SORPI arrangements. So you were saying there that that SORPI arrangement was to be a short-term piece, and that was then to fall once assets were up to a standard. We're still not at that stage, clearly, but it is being looked at in terms of SORPI arrangements. So what is your view in terms of the ministers who are looking at taking away those SORPI arrangements at this moment in time?
Well, I would love to think that that sort of collaborative approach would allow us to say, here's the commitments, and this is what the OEP have asked for. If you could set out the work that you're going to do, and in a programme of work that is milestoned, that gets the assets to a condition that they can treat to the requirement of the higher standards, and then you can drop, you can hold NI Water to account for delivering against those higher standards. It just feels to me, the goal that we want is better water quality. All of us want better water quality. So in order to achieve that, there needs to be, I think, removing of the SORPI has to go hand in glove with a programme of work to invest in the wastewater assets, and I think that would be a super outcome. That's what we should be trying to achieve.
I suppose the difficulty is we're dealing with pollution incidences, and some of those do come from bigger companies as well, and they're looking towards government to have in place a SORPI arrangement which is effectively allowing overspills into our waterways.
I suppose it's an arrangement that recognises the top treatment capacity of the assets. So you cannot make an asset operate better than what it is designed for. So I cannot deliver the higher environmental standards with the asset base that we have. So the answer is invest in the assets and increase the standards. And that's why we have been engaged with the Environment Agency through their wastewater reform programme. That's why PC21 had quite a bit of work and capital allowed in monitoring equipment so that you could better understand which are the assets that require investment. That's why we've been doing environmental modelling to make sure that when we spend capital, we spend it on the areas that deliver the best outcome for the environment. So all that we're talking about today is trying to achieve that environmental outcome.
I suppose the difficulty is we're not seeing, we have budget constraints across all government departments, and I suppose if I could move on in relation to, there's an awful lot of talk in terms of developer-led contributions and what developers can do. And you were saying there in your presentation and the evidence that we had received before that NI Water can accommodate 18,000 new properties with the help of developers, but can't connect that further 19,000 properties. So just so that I'm clear, what help is required from the developers in order to connect those properties, and can these only be built if developers do something? Can nothing be built otherwise?
So for those 18,000 where solutions have been identified, and I think you've heard evidence to this end, developers then have to work independently to try and find storm water and remove it, so to carry out either the engineering or the soft SUDS type work to make sure that storm water doesn't reach the sewers, and therefore create the capacity for their new connection. But that is a cost burden, and some developers are saying, actually, look, when we look at it, when we cost it up, it's more than we wanted to spend, so we won't do the work and we'll pause and wait. Others are going to do the work, and those properties can connect. But so it's kind of that question, how many of these will go forward, sits with the developers in order for them to be able to say what they can and can't do. Now, the piece of that is that's only permitted to happen under this SORPI arrangement that says you won't make anything worse. It's called the principle of zero detriment. The higher standards that are being talked about will remove that principle of zero detriment, which will remove even that accommodation. So that's an accommodation whereby our assets are not up to standard. There are more spills to the environment than you would want, and the Environment Agency have said, so long as you don't make things any worse, you can continue. If that dispensation is removed, then the stormwater offsetting is a solution that will be no longer viable either. So you can't really escape the fact that you have to increase your capacity and your wastewater infrastructure. You have to invest in it if you want to connect.
So I want to touch on the modelling that NI Water does in relation to wastewater treatment, and in written evidence, Mark Design and Sheedy Consulting, which is included in our packs today, they acknowledge that assessment is required on a site-by-site basis, but it advises that it would be of assistance to have a more detailed mapping or breakdown by postcode rather than a blanket approach. So my question is, what consideration has been given to making capacity modelling information more widely available, because that would perhaps help developers, architects, that whole industry?
Yeah. So we're very open to chatting to people. That's why we have that pre-development inquiry process, so that people can come and they can understand better the area that they're in. I hear people wholesale saying, why isn't it just on an internet, on a map? One of the concerns that you might have is that has an impact on the attractiveness of land prices right across Northern Ireland. So what we do is we make available to people information as they come to us, and if they come to us through the pre-development inquiry process, they can get information on their individual locales or where it is that they're thinking of developing. So we are very open to working with consultants and developers to try and we take feedback in relation to models. I mean, we would be the first to say you can only model with the data that you have, and as you get better information, we're feeding that into our models to upgrade them and to make sure that they're as kept as up to date as possible. But I think the other thing to recognise, and that the engineers have said to me, is that this is all back to how many spills go into the environment. At the end of the day, how much wastewater is spilling into the environment is the end determinant. So sometimes varying whether a stormwater connection is or is not connecting to a pipe may not determine the level of overall spills, because these models are verified with flow measurements. So if a model has been verified with a flow measurement, and the flow measurement is saying very clearly that through an actual flow there is a spill, then it doesn't really matter if someone can say, well, actually that bit of storm pipe didn't connect or did connect. The spills are still happening, and the spills are the things that are doing the environmental damage, and that those are the things that need to be minimised.
So just on that point, in your presentation, 1,200 storm overflows are still to be assessed. So are those that are still to be assessed, are those in areas of constraint?
Right across Northern Ireland. They'll be right across Northern Ireland, because areas of constraint are right across Northern Ireland.
Okay. I'm going to go to the Deputy Chair.
Okay, yeah, thanks very much, Chair, Sara and Ronan, and to your team. Thanks so much, first of all, for the invite to come here today and for the excellent tour, and also to your staff across the country, who have to say invariably go above and beyond when contacted by myself, and I'm sure with the other MLAs here, so I do appreciate that, and I am 100% sympathetic to the funding crisis, and will be continually supporting to get the funding package that you need and deserve, and that Northern Ireland needs to move forward. But I just want to look at some of the policies around the areas of constraint. First of all, in a closed catchment area in Northern Ireland, Water only consider providing a positive planning response where developers can demonstrate that the proposed development is like for like, and you've created and are rigorously enforcing a 5-year rule when assessing like for like cases, i.e. that the building must be operational within the previous 5 years. But often those premises are vacant and not abandoned, so in theory they could be switched on at any time, yet that doesn't seem to be applied to any of the processes when assessing it. A change at all to that process could open up industrial, brownfield or economic or sites in such a way. So in relation to that, who decided on the 5-year rule, firstly, and what was the rationale for that?
So I don't have the who decided on the 5-year rule. I guess I can just give you my logical impact to it. So in general, our models will be sort of refreshed on that kind of a cycle. And if something is vacant for 5 years, and there are a higher level of spills to the environment, if you occupy it and put more waste in, you're pushing more spills. So all these decisions and constraints are based on the fact that we are now aware that the level of spills to the environment is much higher than is permitted.
Okay, I appreciate that, but I suppose within those areas, they could at any stage, the owner or the occupier of that existing building could go back in and reoccupy it and continue to contribute to the system.
But
that is the case.
If we know an area is polluting, okay, just because it could pollute even more doesn't make it right to pollute even more, and that's the place that we find ourselves, and we would have to be able, as a responsible water utility, we would have to be able to demonstrate to the Environment Agency that we are not putting in place by our actions additional pollution.
So in relation to that 5-year rule, was there any consultation required to be carried out with stakeholders in relation to that, or was that something that can be...
So I recognise that this is a query that has been raised with yourselves, but it hasn't been raised with me, so so I don't have the facts behind that, and I can get them, but I don't have them. And
maybe along the reason of why it's 5 and not 10 or 15 years would be incredibly useful as well. If I may, Chair, then I just want to take to a local issue, but this is something that impacts us across the country in areas of constraint. So, for example, in my constituency of Larkin recently, a local special educational needs school applied for 3 new mobiles to be put in. All the children who would have been using those 3 new mobiles live in the Larkin area. That was turned down as a matter of course because Northern Ireland Water said there wasn't capacity issues, despite the fact, not to be too graphic, those children would have been using their facilities at home, and when they run at home they would have been in the school. Is there any opportunity given to the fact to assess each of these on their merits rather than a blanket ban to say no, that can't be done simply because it's an area of constraint? If you understand the example in Tranches.
There is an attempt to assess in the merits, but when you know an area is excessively overloaded,
I appreciate that.
You cannot.
But if they would have been in the house in Larkin rather than the school.
But if Larkin is excessively overloaded as it stands, then again, as a responsible organisation that has environmental commitments, it's very difficult for us. We would leave ourselves open to prosecution. It's very difficult for us to be able to take actions that can demonstratively add to that pollution potential. So that is part of why you find yourself in this situation.
I appreciate that.
And so, could we find a way through, well, potentially working with the Environment Agency? So if the Environment Agency felt that was, and that's why we explored with them and took the time to really push that zero detriment piece. So if there was a way to extend that, but it would require the buy-in of the Environment Agency. But certainly if that's something that was acceptable to them, then I think we're happy to work with other agencies.
Well, that comes to my last question, Sharon, if I may. It's exactly around that. So in areas or in specific projects that the executive, for example, is prioritising, like, for example, special educational needs schools or areas of economic development, if there was that flexibility and buy-in from stakeholders like NIA, is there a process that we could work towards whereby there would be a flexibility within the current constraints?
And probably the best person to... So we can be flexible within the legislative and regulatory framework that we're given. So talking to the legislators and the regulators are the people who can give us the flexibility. They are the people who give us whatever flexibility that we have. So I do think that that's probably a conversation for NIEA.
Is that something that's ever been asked for by NI Water with them?
So we asked and explored that zero detriment piece, and they worked very well with us on that. But from their environmental stewardship role, they seem to be saying now, and the chair has alluded to that, we need to be very strict, and we need to apply strictly the letter of the law.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Keith.
Okay, and thanks for the tour. I appreciate all that. My question, I want to start by the first slide here on our page 57. It says, NI Water's wastewater system is at breaking point. The system can't cope during heavy rainfalls and spills to the environment occur. Okay. So my question is, hypothetically, if we don't have heavy rain, okay, which is a hypothetical point, can your system cope today?
There are still some, so we talk about these overflows, and some of them are called unacceptable intermittent discharges. And what that means that is in some areas, those discharges can spill when there isn't heavy rain. So the system across
So
North...
how does that, explain that to me, how that happens?
Because there's more sewage going in, or more foul water going into the pipe than the size of the pipe can cope with, and therefore when it gets to capacity, it releases through the overflow, and that's called a UID.
But if it's not raining, Sarah, theoretically not raining, that's a standard flow.
Yes.
How can that overflow?
Because it's a pipe, okay, so the pipe's this size, and if there's more stuff coming down the pipe, then it comes out the hole at the side of the pipe.
So that would mean there's overflows happening 24/7?
There's the potential for that, not 24/7, because the pipe's not always full, so sometimes it'll be running down this level. But if you had increased flows, then yeah.
But the only way, and I'm not debating, but the only way you'll increase flows rain.
Not only.
Industrial load, but there might be more industrial load coming in. Don't just think of the households. Think of manufacturing and businesses and so forth, and all of those things can add load. And at peak times, that pipe could be overflowing. At other times, it may not be. I think it's a good question, Keith.
Okay, so we've established, and I appreciate them using the rain as an example. So heavy rain creates a bigger problem than there is a problem currently there. So how do we then get? We're talking about finances. We know what's ultimately needed. How do we get away between now and then? We need a midway point. You don't want any more connections to your system, yes? So if a developer goes to build 20, 30, 40 houses or whatever, and he or she says, right, I'm going to put in a package plant, treatment plant, but I'm not going to connect to your system. What's your thought on the whole septic tank soak-away principle? So your loading isn't going to go up. You have a septic plant, treatment plant sitting there, but no connection to your system.
So I guess that's probably not really a question for me, because the question's for the Environment Agency. They consent those, and they would be best placed to say what environmental impact that might have. I think all of you probably have made representations, though, to us in the past where wastewater assets are built by developers and are not adopted because developers at some point have to walk away, and if they haven't put a management framework in place for the maintenance of those assets, you do get problems. So the best solution is to have assets that can be adopted. And then you might lead to the question that says, well, why don't we just build lots and lots of small treatment plants and you can adopt them? And that might take you back to where Ronan has said there's a £23 million gap in our running costs. If we create a network and an infrastructure of tiny, tiny wastewater plants, and remember we have over 1,000 wastewater plants as it is. We have 24 water treatment plants. We have over 1,000 wastewater treatment facilities. If we connect lots and lots and lots and lots of more tiny ones, that £23 million gap's only going to get bigger, and you're creating another problem for yourself. So again, back to how do you do things right? Design it right is you make sure you have capacity in your wastewater system. And how do you do it right and allow development to continue? The PC21 plan allowed for that, because what was happening is developers were developing up to a stage because our investment programme was coming behind them. What you have found now is the investment programme has been hard stopped, and that's causing a lot of difficulties, and we're having to say to people there is a hard stop and I have no line of sight to these new assets. But the question around should you have soakaways or should you not is definitely one for NIEA.
So I just want to give you an example. I'm not going to get into detail if I may.
Very quickly, because we have a number of members.
A developer goes to build 20, 30, 40 houses, communicates with you guys, NI Water, and they come back and say that the treatment work should be constructed such that it will be offered for adoption under Article 161. So that developer goes ahead, into planning, goes through the process, gets planning approval with a condition, and it's important, if I may, Chair, the condition says the plant shall be maintained by the developer until such times as it is adopted by NI Water or is no longer necessary to serve the development. So that developer has got planning approval. Legally, he or she could go and build those houses. Technically. But then after this, NI Water come back and says, we're not giving you 161. So why do you give the possibility yet? Build it till a 161 possibility. Planning approval is approved, and this is costing thousands of pounds, you can understand, to get this, and then they're not accepting the 161. So, but technically, they can build these houses and put in a treatment plant, according to the document I have in front of me, which is the green light from planning, to say, go ahead, and the developer maintains it until it's adopted.
But it'll never be adopted.
But why then does NI Water, several months before, say, should be constructed that it shall be offered for adoption under 161?
And I think, I don't know the specifics of that case, and I'm happy to take it away.
But it's broadly, you know my point. Either it's...
And I don't think that happens routinely, and I would, if I had to hazard a guess, I would say it was, that was probably one of the early developments where we were trying at every juncture to find an accommodation to allow people to continue to build so that the investment programme could catch up.
It's only 24. It's only months ago. But I'm just making the point, the developers is getting a yes, go ahead, and they're heading in a direction, and then suddenly the door closes.
And look, the entire supply chain of NI Water is in the same position, where we've gone through a significant procurement, we've brought on board a supply chain, we're stand ready to invest. You've seen the graph, significant amounts of money, and that's all been stood down as well.
And
Keith,
I may
very
close
quickly,
this point.
because I do
NIA's response to the same application was no private sewage infrastructure will be granted a sewage consent relating to housing development unless an Article 161 agreement and bond is in place. Why can a developer not put in the correct equipment to your standard and put in a bond to secure it, maintain it, whatever terminology, insure it so that it's fail safe but provide no connection to you? So if there's no more loading going in the system, and you put in the soak-away principle, as I call it, it's there, it's working in other countries in the world. Why are we not looking between NI Water and NEA to that solution to get some degree of building commencing without putting any more loading on you?
I think that's probably a question for NIEA. The thing that I would I would still point back to you with respect all the unadopted developments that exist and that this committee has examined in some detail, and there are a significant amount of people living in unadopted developments where their infrastructure is not in good nick and they can't afford to fix it, and they are struggling to sell their houses. And so if you go down this route, you are increasing the risk of that happening to even more people. So it's not a question for me because I don't make those policies, so it is a question, I think, for the policymakers. But I would say it is much better to have the infrastructure and have it under the ownership of a utility that has to look after it in a really good manner. And that's what we have to do.
Thank you, Keith. At this juncture, I'll declare an interest somebody that lives in an unadopted development, but it's a fairly new development. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, folks, for the presentation and the tour and the welcome. You mentioned, Sarah, just towards the end of your presentation about contrast with the rest of other parts of the UK. Can you tell me what lessons or good practice do you feel that should be looked at seriously to help us here in Northern Ireland? And also, just maybe on the back of that, what impact, if you may not know yet, but the most recent October monitoring round, just how that may impact yourselves, and is that a step in the right direction?
So look, I'll probably hand over to Ronan in relation to the UK water companies have gone through a price control review. They've put their business plans in for the next 5 years' worth of investments. Maybe you want to talk about what they're doing in relation to wastewater?
So at the moment they're finalising those arrangements for the 20-odd companies in England and Wales, and some of the issues in England and Wales are well documented, but by and large the system works. But the key principle is that when the regulator examines the company's plans and gives a determination, the regulator is called Ofwat, that's the same as our utility regulator here, and our model is pretty much based on the same principles. The regulator opines and says there's the determination of the plan. In actual fact, what the regulator has determined is the investment in capital, and not least in wastewater and pollution and CSOs, the things that we're talking about this morning. The regulator has allowed that to almost double in size in the PR24, in the price control 24. So England and Wales is about to embark on an enormous capital programme to get after the things that they know impact people in England and Wales, and that we know that they impact us here. So the first principle is you've got to invest, okay? And once the regulator opines and determines on the plan over there for the Ofwat companies, the next thing the regulator asks is, are you able to fund your plan? And they want to see a signed up to funding tiered plan that makes sure that the companies who are the licensees, same as Northern Ireland Water, can go off and make those investments happen on behalf of customers. So that's probably the first thing there. But the reason why they're investing on doubling the investment is because they've recognised, I guess in the same way as Northern Ireland now recognises it needs to invest in particularly its drainage infrastructure. And I wouldn't exclude water. Water absolutely needs investment as well. But absolutely there's a huge need for the drainage infrastructure to invest. Once that's recognised and a regulator determines it, then the investment has to be forthcoming. In ordinary terms, the shareholder has to make sure they can put the funding up. There's a number of examples in Wales at the moment where that's kind of one example, particularly that's stuck in Thames Water, and there are conversations going on with funders and shareholders, and the government and the regulators carefully monitoring that situation with Thames Water. But that principle of the company's plan, they submit their plans for scrutiny to a regulator, the regulator examines the plans and determines an outcome for those plans. It then gives that back to the companies, and the companies have to decide to sign up or not to sign up, and then the plans have to be funded so that customers can have the services that need to be available today and into the future. And those are the key things there. So that's what's happening, I think, in the England and Wales piece. You mentioned, I think, monitoring rounds as well.
Yeah.
So in the October monitoring round, Northern Ireland Water put bids into the department. We bid for £23 million to cover the gap in the operating cost this year, and we asked we put a bid in for £30 million of capital so that we could continue to drive some of the schemes that we know we could get after, even in this short-term window between now and the end of the year. I think the outcome of the monitoring round, I think, there was some publication this week just on that, and we haven't seen an outcome for Northern Ireland Water yet. So we'll work with the department to see what that outcome is, but we haven't seen an outcome on the resource-style piece, the £23 million gap that will cause issues this second half of the year, this winter, and we haven't seen an outcome on the capital piece yet. We await an outcome to come from the department on that, so the department will brief us in the fullness of time. But we do want to know what the outcome is on both of those lines, and the quicker we have an outcome on the capital side, the quicker we can start using that money and getting that money into the ground. The last thing I'll say is that Scotland has its own water company, Scottish Water. It is regulated by an authority up in Scotland, and the principles as to how they're regulated are broadly the same as the principles how Northern Ireland Water is regulated, but by and large the funding is made available to put in place the plans that the Scottish Water Regulator says have to happen for customers. There may be tweaks in those plans, there may be little bits of funding that don't happen sometimes, but by and large the funding is made available.
Okay, thank you. Just a couple of more quick ones. Just in terms of Belfast Lock, you touched upon that the Living with Water programme could be paused. I suppose just keen to establish what impact that could have on the environment, including within my own constituency of North Down, which covers into that area. And obviously, there's concern that we don't want to see another Loch Ness, and you're aware of that, and that has been put out recently over the last number of weeks. Yes. And then Kinnigar wastewater treatment works, I understand it's due to be upgraded. Earlier this year, there was some work on that. So, is that going to be impacted on that pause?
So, I'll start with the last question first. Yes, Kinnigar's investment for upgrading Kinnigar will and is being impacted by the impact of the shortfall in funding. So, the answer is that yes, it is. Okay. If we then pick up beyond that, the wider kind of the catchment around Belfast Lock, so the Living with Water programme actually was an excellent example of collaboration with the stakeholders across the piece, the department, the regulator, and others who came together, the Environment Agency, etc., Belfast City Council, etc., who came together to look at that, the system around the lock and what needs invested, so that the receiving waters, Belfast Lock themselves, can reach good standard. The programme at the moment, I think, is probably paused for funding again because there's an issue in funding and constraints in Northern Ireland. Without that funding going in place, we cannot begin to do the investment programmes around sort of 5-6 key plants from north down, sort of from Kinnigar, Hollywood, right into Duncrew Street itself, and back out the other side to Whitehouse, Greencastle, and out as far as Carrick. And yet we know that those plans. Those investments need to happen. There's an endorsement in the current price control PC21 to make to begin that Living with Water programme now and to continue it into the next price control so the work gets done. The key stakeholders have endorsed it. It particularly ties up with the ambitions that Belfast has for its future in terms of attracting people to live in and around the city, creating jobs in the city, attracting students in to come and study in the city and live in the city while they're studying. So Belfast, that is a key programme. The receiving waters in Belfast Lough, there are sensitivities around those waters, and the Environment Agency will set standards for us and have set standards to where those receiving waters have to reach.
So 90% of the nutrient load that happens in Belfast Lough is coming from NI water assets. So whilst Lough Neagh, it's less than 20%. Belfast Lough, we know it's NI water assets, and we now know that we're not doing the construction work to fix those assets.
Okay.
And a study has recently been completed around it's called the story of the Belfast Lough, and it's a programme that it's a study that was examined and endorsed by stakeholders, and it's out there now as well. But it basically says where we are, where we need to be, and without putting the proper investment in, where Northern Ireland is going to get to with its Belfast Lough.
And it's probably worth noting a third of the population of Northern Ireland is served by those assets and catchments. So when you think about, if you know it's overloaded, and you might have, and you likely have to say no to development, that's currently a third of the population of Northern Ireland live there.
Yeah, no, there's a significant challenge. Just final question, very briefly. There was a number of media reports around NI water staff potentially being balloted on strike action this week, very soon. Is there any more you can say on that at this stage, or what any potential impact that could have on services?
There is a ballot ongoing at the minute, and the ballot will close at the beginning of next month. And it's something of deep concern for us as an organisation. And for sure, you've all said, our people provide an essential service. So if there happened to be industrial action or action short of industrial action, there would absolutely be an impact on services to customers. And
I think maybe I just pick up, some of the people you met this morning here, some of the staff members you met this morning, these are the staff members we're talking about. They continue to await an outcome for a 23-24 pay review. Not a 24-25 pay review, but a 23-24 pay review. And that's why we're keen to make sure that any gap that exists currently as well, that £23 million, it's important that gap is closed, so we can get these people paid a pay review for 23-24, as well as thinking about the 24-25 pay review for these people also. So these people are waiting patiently while doing their job.
19 months.
And we would always give a shout out to those are our staff, those are the people that make the systems run every day. You've met some of those people this morning. It's important that they know what's happening with their pay. It's causing them issues, and that's why we're keen to make sure we understand where the funding is.
Thank you. Thanks,
okay.
Chair.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. I suppose just listening there, forgive me, it was a slide on the one of the environment slides, and I just took the note, Ms. Venning, of permanent future of hyper levels of pollution. And that, the more I thought about it, the more it struck me, so it did, I suppose really just, obviously the storm overflows and the wastewater treatment plants, and I think as Keith has sort of touched on, about how these are affected. I suppose it's sort of a two-part question, really, in the sense of how much does NI Water forecast need to fix all of these, really? But then also, obviously, if there's more pollution going in, and we've seen today how the water is taken out, and I think you referenced the fact that there was, because of the deteriorating quality of some of the water, that means additional measures, which then is additional, one would assume, additional costs. And then we're sort of in this sort of downward spiral of, I suppose just how do we fix, how do these things get fixed?
Yeah.
And
so I think it's all back to the environment, wasn't it? And the root cause is how do you make, having good raw water quality.
Yeah.
So, and that's a joined up approach. It's not for sure just NI Water on its own. You've agriculture as well. So we want to ensure good raw water quality. That's what the river basin management plans are about. That's what the OEP have given their report, and what they have said is have plans with milestones that describes the interventions that you're going to make, how much they're going to cost, and when you're going to do them by. That's what they have asked for. And to be fair, that's what a water company does. So in PC21 we had plans with milestones, with plants that would be upgraded, with networks that would be upgraded, and timeframes for doing that. And then, as you've seen, we now look to the next 6 years and the next 6 years. So it is a slow burn and a long term fix, but you can absolutely do it. You have added complications because you're going to have to bring in what do you do for climate change. But the wherewithal to do it is here. The wherewithal to do it sits with us as a company and with Northern Ireland. The key challenge is how do you fund it? And remember, as you do a regulatory price control, affordability is taken into account. So whilst we talk about big numbers, they are affordable within, business customers are paying for this, so they are affordable within tariffs. That's given consideration to, and that's why it just takes a little longer to get all the work that you need to do done. But that's why we have the likes of a Living with Water programme in Belfast. So we were very clear, Belfast Lough has poor water quality. We need to fix Belfast wastewater treatment works. We know now how much that's going to cost. We actually had the team ready. They were ready to start building. We would have been building it right now. We know we're designing the Kinniger solution, the Sydenham solution. So it's a programme of works, but that's what water companies do. And actually, you can have that. Northern Ireland can have that. It is in hand. So the challenge then is, how do we make sure that it can get funded? How do we identify a sustainable funding stream that allows that programme line of sight for the next 6-year period and the 6 years beyond? Because we've stopped it, and because we've stopped it, I think I heard the CEF or maybe it was the architect say that's a potential 2 to 3 year delay that is being introduced, even though it's only been paused for 9 months at this stage, or maybe it's 11 months now. So don't stop it. Get the work
done. Don't stop that programme work.
Don't stop the programme.
Invest. Put the money into the assets so that people can have the services and the economy can grow. It's not a case of Northern Ireland Water needs this. Northern Ireland needs this investment so that it can provide those services to its citizens. It can allow for a growing economy. There's great ambition, I know, in the current government for growth in the economy. You cannot grow it on the back of poor infrastructure. It's as simple as that. And I think I'm probably echoing what I think I heard Royal Society of Ulster Architects, Construction Employers Federations and others say when they met you recently as well.
Andrew, are you okay? Or?
Yeah, I'll come back. Yeah, no, thank you. And I suppose this follows on then, and again, really, is that, there are two, that I was touched on a wee bit, but there's essentially, we've seen the gap, and, there's essentially two options, I think, is we can, keep doing what we're doing, and that gap just extrapolates on out, or change the funding model, essentially. And I suppose, really, what are the implications of doing both, just to sort of really, again, just to elaborate on that?
Well, if I pick up on that one, the Northern Ireland Audit Office has completed a piece of work where it has asked, and its key recommendation from the piece of work, and it was a 2-year study it carried out, and its key recommendation within that report, this is the Audit Office, it's not Northern Ireland Water, the recommendation key is for an independent, expert-led review for the options around how Northern Ireland wants to fund these services. So, I would start with that recommendation and get that independent, expert-led review underway, because I think that starts to, give you some of those answers that you're asking, Andrew, around how might the funding options look and feel differently. Now, I think coming back from that let's say that review gets underway, let it take its course, let it carry out, but it's an important recommendation that possibly currently is sitting and not necessarily being undertaken right now. But in the meantime, I suppose the policy in Northern Ireland is not to charge citizens for water, wastewater at home, but the policy is to make sure that they have the services. So what we ask for as the company owned by government, who's tasked with making the services happen every day and making sure that the investment's going in to make them happen in the future, is fund the government-owned water company, make that happen. Because the good news is Northern Ireland has a good water company. Its structure and programme and how it goes about the planning for that is solid and sound. It's regulated by an independent regulator. So they scrutinise what we do. We are probably the most monitored organisation in Northern Ireland, so if we don't get something done, people will know about it pretty quickly. But you have to fund it, and the current policy is that it will be funded through government intervention, and I think that's the part that's starting to really sort of cause an issue. But our ask is that you simply fund it fund the company that Northern Ireland owns, so that these services can continue to happen. That's the current policy, and we support that policy very much as a government-owned company.
Okay. One
more
more.
question? Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
quickly.
No,
Yeah.
yeah,
Two
no.
other members here.
No, I'm just going for the three, Chair. Just on that slide there, okay, so you see the net zero transition,
Yes.
and that's at the very, very top.
Yeah.
And certainly you have the new sludge disposable facility, which is again at the very, very top. And we saw some of that dried up, peat briquette type of stuff there. I'm just, given that net zero is at the very, very top of all this funding that essentially isn't, no extra funding there that says there, I mean, how will that implicate with net zero legal implications and the legal implications of that? How will that affect? And then also just as a sort of a slight add-on to the sludge disposable, and maybe what other nature-based solutions are there, or what nature-based solutions can that sludge be? I mean, I'm just trying to think of the circular economy here, sort of thing.
I think in relation to the sludge, it's important to be very, very clear that sludge disposal facility is for your wastewater.
Yeah.
So everything you flush down the toilet at the minute goes to a wastewater treatment works. It gets treated, and there's a similar cake, okay, that gets produced. And there are 2 incinerators in Belfast that burn that at the minute. We get limited energy, very limited energy from it. So it gets burnt and it gets sent up a chimney. Those 2 incinerators are under contract with a PPP provider, and they are end of life in 2032. So they will not, one of them definitely won't work. It's very old, definitely won't work. That means by 2032, we know we have no means of disposing of the waste, 50% of the waste for Northern Ireland. So we have to put something in place. So it is almost, new sludge disposal facility is an absolute must do, but it's very expensive. Now, we will have to design and build it in that period up to 2032. And then net zero and climate change and climate resilience are all things that, so as a water company, we have a climate change strategy. We have identified all the areas that we need to work in and changes that we need to make. And indeed, we have identified that there will be a cost associated with that. And that goes back to, I suppose, the whole principles of just transition and where do those costs sit. So some of those debates are still happening, whether they would all sit through a regulated model and get passed back out to customers isn't quite clear. But what we can do is set out, this is the work that you will need to do. If you want to get to net zero for energy, this is what you will need to do. If you want climate resilience, this is what you will need to do. If you want to take carbon out of your supply chain, this is what you will need to do. And we're doing that work.
But will that work be affected? Just by that line is there, will that work be affected?
So yes, at 321. So if there was a suggestion that you would continue to invest in your capital to the same level as you are investing now, you won't do any enhancement in your wastewater. You won't have a sludge disposal facility. You won't be spending any money on net zero. But worse, you won't be spending money on water enhancement. Yeah. So the work that you need to do on your water enhancement, so things like dealing with algae blooms, or if more water will be needed for people, you don't even have enough money for that. So, I mean, the signal here is there is more money that needs to be invested in these assets for this water utility, which also then says, so it's really important to think about how are we going to fund this, because as a society, we can't not have these facilities.
Thank you. As I say, patience is a virtue. Cahill and then Mark.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you very much for the presentation and the visit this morning. I'm going to take it in a totally different direction, to be honest with you. Because, to be fair, I understand the environmental challenges 100%, and nobody would argue that. But just 2 points. In terms of the midterm review, was there any negativity or anything respond in terms of, or how do you feel about the midterm review from the utility regulator?
Well, I think first and foremost it was a piece that all the stakeholders, including the department sponsor body, agreed when we put PC21 in place at the outset. It was agreed that we would do a midterm review. So we did quite a lot of work on that midterm review to underpin our own support for that. The regulator has studied it and scrutinised that submission, and I think it's a positive outcome for knowing and identifying that actually pretty much all that we had in the plan originally, the regulator continues to endorse that. There might be some minor changes in that, but by and large, the lion's share of everything we put into the PC21 plan and they originally determined on, they continue to say at the mid-term stage that needs delivered for customers in Northern Ireland. But the key thing they looked at is we need more running cost to run the business every day because costs have really gone up. We're still in this hyperinflation scenario where inflation is going up. People say it's come down because it's sitting at 2% or whatever now. It's not. It's still going up by 2%. But that was in the back of the highest inflation seen since about 1948. And so prices have gone up. Prices for energy. You know yourself from the conversations you'll have with some of your constituents and others about energy bills. Energy prices continue to grow. They continue to rise. They got up to 4% in Northern Ireland last month. So the regulator has said, look, those are things that you could not have foreseen when you put your price control 21 plan in place in 2020. We now need to allow you more money because you have to go out and buy the energy and use the energy to run the systems. You've seen some of the plants we have here. There's energy being used here this morning. So the regulator has allowed an additional amount of money to be put into our determination for those volatile costs. So they recognise that we're efficient. We continue to be efficient, but they know our prices have gone up, that we have to pay for some for inputs, and that price has to be recovered somewhere. So that means that we will need more resource, Dale, from our funding model from government, as well as we'll have to charge more to customers. And then on the capital side, they've looked at the impact of the inflation on capital schemes, and they've said, yes, that has gone up. And significantly, those capital schemes that were determined, that they still say should go ahead, will now cost Northern Ireland more money. But Northern Ireland still needs those schemes to be in place. So I think by and large, Cathal, to your question, I think the mid-term review is a positive endorsement of the plan that all the stakeholders worked with us to put together back in PC21. That plan continues to be endorsed in the mid-term review, and the need continues to be there. But we know the immediacy of that need continues to get closer because we see the impacts of not making those investments for housing, for businesses and others.
And Ronan, just a wee supplement to that in terms of the real price of facts, because it's been observed in the report. I mean, you're content that you can deal with that?
No, we have to have the funding in place to deal with that. So
but it says in the report that the utility regulator will work with you.
Yes,
they're going to do more work. So as it stands, 2.4 billion. It's just that they didn't get through all the work, and also that they recognise at 321 per annum spend. Not all of those schemes are now going to get delivered. But by the time we go for the next price control, they will have done that work. And what they did signal is, so 2.4 would be the lower end of what you would need to spend for that work.
And I think they've done quite a bit of that work even since they published this. And we're starting to get an early stage readout from that for them informally at this point. They'll publish again on that one. But you will see that cost need sits there and goes up. And what they're saying is, yes, it has gone up. It's cost that you can't avoid as the water company, and so it has to be invested, and that money has to be found to make these asset investments so that customers can continue to
Fair enough. I'm a fine point, Chair, and I think this is an important one because all of us are set in the job and we keep talking about departments working in silos. There's nobody connected to government can work in silos. So I want to turn the argument around. I appreciate the environmental issues, but we need housing and we need development, sir. And my point, and I appreciate you kept mentioning NEA's responsibility. I would agree with Keith in this matter. We all need collective need to talk with council. There's no point in councils drawing up local development plans and saying we need 10,000 units over the next 10 years, and that's their plan. And growing the economy and building and skills and everything else associated with it, without us all being involved in the game. So I would, I appreciate you of a working engagement with individual developments, how they develop, but we need a broader discussion because the ministers give 40% of the budget this year, so we'll have a conversation. But I appreciate today we come down to listen to, and I've seen what's happening. We need a broader conversation right across the board how we're going to deliver, because this is for all the departments and all the outside bodies and all the bodies linked to every department to address these issues.
Yeah.
Because we're getting crying out about social housing, affordable housing, and everything else. Can't get connections, but it's just on that point to have the broader discussion.
I think, Kath, that's a fair point. I mean, we know that in our case, water, wastewater, and Northern Ireland Water sits within the Department for Infrastructure. But I would say to all of you, this is an all-executive matter. This is an all-executive issue, which has a profound effect on societal issues here in Northern Ireland. So housing, basic human rights around housing, human rights around clean, safe drinking water, how we all want our environment to look and feel for everybody who live here. So all of those things are good everyday needs. And it's sitting housed within the Department of Infrastructure. But I agree with you. This is an all-executive matter. And perhaps a really strong place to start is to go back to that NIAO report, to pick out that key recommendation around that independent, expert-led review on how best to fund these services for customers and get that underway. And we will contribute to that. We will contribute to that review.
Thank you. Yeah, it is key because it is programme for government headline. And I'm sure you did respond to the consultation period in relation to that and made no one in terms of constraint issues, I'm sure.
We have done that, Chair, and I think, very quickly, there are 9 key pillars within the programme for government, and we've examined them carefully, and we sit firmly within 4 of those. If we can make happen what we need to make happen, 4 of those are immediately supported.
Thank you. Mark?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the crew for your hospitality today and for coming along to give evidence. I think what we're hearing today and what we've been seeing for some time is the impact of decades of under-investment on the environment and on the economy. And it's not just architects or the construction industry, it is the whole economy and all of society. I think what we've heard today, and it's not the first time you'll have heard it, is, I suppose, a recognition of the importance of Northern Ireland water from all parties. But you really need to see that materialise into making a difference. Some of the questions I'd be going to ask had been touched on. I was particularly interested in a wee bit about it in the way around, Sara, and that was the modelling, the modelling that a lot of these decisions refusals are being based on, and I appreciate now, having listened, about its modelling and measuring. But in terms of the modelling, concerns have been raised around the accuracy of it. I don't know what has been or what is the verification process around that. And then the flip side of that, on the measuring, how, where and when is that done?
So there are 2 elements to it. So if you take the modelling and the modelling work that we have done that in conjunction with consulting engineers who do this kind of work right across the UK, and they've put their professional indemnity on the line to underpin those models. And we have shared through presentations with the Construction Employers Federation how they're done, or the verification that comes with that. In relation to the monitoring that you asked about, so when a model or when a drainage area plan is being done, there may be flow recording happening, not permanent flow recording, happens over the course of maybe 12 months as those plans or drainage area plans are developed. But moreover, on those CSOs, then we have installed event duration monitors, and you can go onto our website and you can see where all those event duration monitors have been installed, and you can get some information on what it is that they are recording. And I think by the end of this price control, we should have had, I can't remember the exact number, but it's probably half of our CSOs would be monitored. And you can see on the map on the NI Water website where all the bathing water discharges, because that's where we focused first, was on bathing waters. So, that's a programme of work. It's a programme of work that is included in the capital programme. Now, for the most part, we'd get up and running on that, so that hasn't stopped or been reduced through PC21. We will finish the PC21 plans out as we had set out to the regulator for those monitors.
And I think you said you update the models as you learn more. So if, for example, with an application there's a survey submitted that's, I suppose, conflicts with the model that you use, is there a comparison then between the two?
So the engineers
and what's done with that
So the engineers
survey
have
that
said
is
to me that they
submitted?
do
Is it used to update?
They take that they can, you know, if someone says, look, you know, your model shows a connection that doesn't exist, we can adjust then our geographic information system to remove that connection, and that they do that on a routine basis. That's what they've told me. I don't do it by myself, but yeah.
Okay, there's I'll go local now for this penultimate question. Chair.
Well, allow that.
The Buncombe Road development, it has been in the news and the issues facing it. I've written to you about the potential for exploring a cross-border solution to that, and I'll keep on that one. But there's great frustration there that this particular scheme has been 20 years. Maybe, you know, it didn't just fall out of the sky. 20 years in the development, and it's only latterly that this issue has come to the fore and it's proven very insurmountable thus far. Why is that? Is that just it's only now that the NIA have stepped up or stepped in?
I think it's more, Marcus, it's not a case of if you the 3-2-1 line going across the graph. So it was a big issue when it initially was a big issue. I think we were probably thinking, oh my goodness, how are we ever going to do this? Then we were planning PC21. It was factored within our plans for PC21, some of that work. And that's why in some of those developments, the conversations were, yes, this should come together. But our plans from last December have been stopped.
You thought you'd have got there.
So therefore, the money's not there.
In year one of PC21, we got the full allocations to get the work underway. So that was quite a good prospect. The regulator had determined our plan and said, yes, your plan's a good plan. Here's some tweaks and so on, but you can now go ahead and do it. There was quite a positive approach to we need to invest. The Living and with Water programme was becoming endorsed as well. People recognised the environmental issues that were happening, and they wanted this to happen. So it's really only, as Sara says, it was really only last December that, for want of a better word, there was a hard stop put on funding on the capital side, said you will not spend over 321, and then since that we've been told, and you will use that number for this year, 24-25, and 25-26, and 26-27, and use that for your next price control planning horizon as well. As we said before, it's awful to think, but this will not go forward in 321. You know, we will start to get to a point where some of the water schemes that we need to do may not happen. Somebody was sworn asked about lead pipe replacement and things like that. They'll go to the wall. They'll not happen. So we can understand the issues that for developers and so on. There's no issue. You know, we know that, we see that, but the hard stop really came onto the capital programme last year and crystallised last December, and we haven't seen it change since. We're waiting for the outcome of this monitoring round in October, whether we might get some more capital or not. We don't know yet. We might know in the coming weeks, but not to the extent that you need to drive the PC21 programme up and get ready for the PC27 programme as well.
And an October monitoring round allocation would have to be spent by March.
Yeah.
So what we're and this goes back to what can developers do. The amount of money that you're investing for some of these schemes is really big amounts of money. It's multi-year programmes of work. So once you start them, you have to finish them. And that goes back to certainty of funding.
And then finally, just to ensure I picked you up right, is the avoidance of strike action and the awarding of a long-awaited and well-deserved pay rise for your staff, it is contingent, is it, on an allocation as part of the monitoring round?
Well, the good news
is, or can you not do it otherwise?
So the 23's
how much would you need?
For 23's 24's pay review, which is the one our staff are waiting an outcome for at this stage. When we completed our 23-24's accounts and our numbers and submitted those numbers through to the consolidation process in the public sector, and we finalised our annual reporting accounts for that year, we have included in our cost base and lived within that cost base for that amount, for that pay rise for 23-24. So that good news is that that cost of that pay review in the 23-24 year is covered in all our costs that we've put together for the 23-24 year, and we've reflected the part of that goes forward, because it goes forward for people in perpetuity. We've reflected that in our 24-25 years estimates and forecasts as well. So what we need is an outcome to that, so that we can we can work with the trade unions and we can let our staff know so that they have some certainty around what they're doing with their incomes. And that's really just, it's 19 months now, I think, since, since staff are waiting for an answer on some of that. So we need to know that. But the good news, I think, to your question is we've put that money away and covered that money and accrued that and filed that appropriately within our 23s, 24s actual numbers. And we've allowed and recognised that a piece of that comes into 24, 25 as that piece is carried forward for people's pay going forward. So we're accounting for it properly. It's sitting within our estimates. And certainly for the 23-24 year, our filed accounts for that year, it's within those numbers. So now what we need is an outcome to that.
Thank you. Just in relation to the October monitoring round, I know Mark, you'd asked at the start, and I apologise because I didn't have it myself just in front of me at the time, but the Department for Infrastructure has been allocated $39.6 million towards capital pressures, including the ongoing issues arising due to the constraints within the wastewater infrastructure and resultant impact both on the construction and environment. The over-planning is $13.7 million, and that is to, I think, come off that $39.6 million. But we'll obviously be seeking more clarity just in relation to what was asked here in the committee. Keith, I am really pushed for time, so you did indicate again to come in very, very quickly if you want to ask your question before we move on.
Just a quick question. With respect to capacity of your current wastewater treatment plants, who do you use to get the maximum optimisation out of those? Is that internal or external or a mix of both?
It would be a mix of both. So we would use process design consultants to help us if we were trying to optimise the works to get more capacity, and it is something that we have done, and we have done a process of optimising and will continue to do so.
And I don't need to know names, but are those local, UK based or European based? The Danes and the Dutch are experts in that. You go as far as that?
We're going as far as you're describing. Yeah, we use local organisations, and we've looked beyond these shores and beyond the UK shores to see what expertise lies out there and how can we deploy it.
And are you utilising that expertise?
We have used that, and we have used some of that, but we know there's more to be done. But it won't solve your whole problem. It won't solve the whole system problem. It can maybe buy you a little bit of capacity from time to time, and we are looking at those now.
Okay,
and we look at what work's been done in America as well. So anywhere we can take learning from and innovation from, we certainly do that.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Just lastly for myself, the executive have their investment strategy that they're currently working through in relation, and it's something I've been asking in the Chamber and to ministers in relation to this, because key parts of that are infrastructure. So have you had any conversations with the Minister, with any executive ministers in relation to that investment strategy, just given how crucial it will be in terms of also that investment piece and delivery on programme for government?
So officials, we will have spoken to officials, and we do share our numbers. To what extent? So as an arm's length body, then we don't make the submission directly through to SIB. So to what extent the numbers that we share make it the whole way through into the investment strategy, I don't know, is the honest answer. But I do think that if you look, as we have forecast forward and thinking about that sludge facility and the impact of climate, I would fear that there will not be sufficient allocation allowed for the full needs of water and wastewater in that investment strategy. When you look at that, you're looking at between, like that peaks at over 800 million in a year.
Yes. So if our forward projections that we had shared at the time were included in the investment strategy, we could take a positive view and say that would be very positive that they were in there, and then they'd have to be kind of all ongoing updated for inflation. So the modelling should do that. If 321's been used, that would give rise to a concern. If 321 was used as an estimate for putting into the investment strategy for the Northern Ireland Water Capital Scheme, I think that might be an issue. Yeah.
Okay. Look, it is stark, and no doubt we'll be continuing to look into this issue. We do appreciate your hospitality today. Thank you for having us. And we do want to put on record, I know members have mentioned it during their contributions, but we do want to put on record thanks to NI Water staff across Northern Ireland who do engage with us on a local level as well. But thank you for your evidence today, and no doubt we'll be in touch in the future. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Okay, members, I think there was just a couple of things that were coming out of that. I had taken a note of NIEA. I think it would be good to touch base and get in contact with them in relation to the constraint issues as well. Keith, do you want to come in on that?
I think it'd be good if we could get NIEA and NI Water.
Sorry, just bear with me. Sorry, if you don't mind, just the public gallery, we've a few things to discuss here. Sorry. Okay, Keith.
So, it'd be good, I think, to get NIEA and NI Water together to have an understanding where they sit between that, because the developer, there's a game of tennis, and I don't mean that disrespectful to any, but it's just tennis.
Yeah.
And you're better probably at the developer saying, you're not getting it, don't do it, don't even move. But they're led right down to the very end, get planning permission, and then can't do anything.
Yeah.
And that's a considerable cost. So I think NIA and NI Water together to get an understanding of that.
Yeah, I would agree, because that was a key thing that was coming out of the architect whenever the architect were in and CEF. Cahill.
I totally agree with that. These people need to be local authority here. There's no point in council giving permission for development and they can't connect up here. There's a broader issue. All I heard there all day was about environmental responsibilities, and there was no talk about growth of sites or developing their housing until you mentioned it. And then the excuse is that NIA is stopping some of the stuff. That's not right. So it was a good enough session. We need to pull the right people in. We can certainly deal with NIA and NAW, but I'd be going back and saying that our councillor, you invite these people in for a conversation. You know what I mean? Because
just to we're the local issue in case, not into the details, but a developer with the green light, you put in the package plant, never Article 161.
No,
people moved into the houses.
But we're seeing that constantly.
No,
that it is a constant thing.
But there's a problem between all those three communicating. The councils theoretically should be given plan permission, theoretically.
Content with that, to go with that as first off. The other thing that I had noted as well, and it's something that has come up in our evidence sessions as well, is that expert-led review as well. I don't think we have checked in relation to that, so that might be something just for us to check up on now, because we've heard that quite a bit in terms of our evidence sessions.
Is that the NI auditor?
The report, yes. That's raised from that report, isn't it?
So it was mentioned before. Sorry, Chair, do you mean just to check what action has been taken in relation to that particular?
Yeah.
Okay.
In terms of, happy enough with that? Yeah. Anything else that members picked up on and wanted to check in on, or
it'd be good to get an understanding how often and how much they spend on consultants to score their homework with respect to capacity. I'm not convinced that the capacity of the treatment plants is optimised. And yes, with the heavy rain thing, I appreciate all that. We can't stop that, but it'd be good to understand how much they spend on that, external consultants, and where they're at. Because before you start spending, you need to squeeze everything out of what you got.
Okay, Deputy Chair.
Just in case they didn't take a look at it, I asked a number of questions around 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And there was no real answer. A commitment to come back to us. I'd be keen to know why it's there, who introduced it, what legislative backing it's got, and why it's not longer.
Yeah.
Bit concerning, or that no one knew that why it was there, but it just is.
And it seems strange to me that people are coming to ourselves as a committee for infrastructure highlighting that 5 year.
Correct.
But NI Water, it doesn't seem to be a key concern or
it is what it is. It seems to be the response.
It seems quite strange, considering we know that there was engagement work that had happened with developers and that industry during the summer as well.
Yes, be good to get those answers.
Sorry, did you?
Yeah, can I just clarify with Keith? It's the spend for consultants specifically for wastewater
Yes,
capacity?
not process water, wastewater.
Wastewater?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, members, happy with that? Okay. Okay, we'll just fly through. We have a couple of items just left, so we'll fly through those now. Item 8 is the residence parking review draft report written evidence at page 126. You'll see the residence parking review draft report. So I'm asking members if they're content to note the update or if they have any further information or clarification which may be required. Mark?
I just wonder maybe could we get oral evidence on it at some stage?
Can note that.
It's a massive and growing issue in a number of constituencies, and this report or review has been long awaited, so I think it requires maybe more thorough interrogation.
That's okay.
Than just looking at written evidence. Can you give that?
I think that would be useful. It has been a very slow process, and it's trying to extend it beyond Rugby Avenue and parts of the Foyle area have been very, very slow, and officials have been still 15 years at least, so I think it would be good to get an oral session on it, maybe even a brief one.
Okay. Okay, members, content with that?
Brief.
Okay, thank you. Item 9 is the part-time 20 mile per hour speed limits at schools review of initiative after tranches 1 and 2 written evidence at page 167. You'll see part-time 20 mile per hour speed limits at schools review, Department for Infrastructure written evidence. So I'm asking members again if they are content to note the results or if they wish to make any comments or any further information or clarification that may be needed, Keith.
A couple of things. I wrote down 3 questions. The 4 million figure, believe it or not, that works at 18,500 per school. I'm not taking away from the figure, but at the time I'd indicated about putting in SIDS. They're A, cheaper, and B, if you look, there's also a figure in there of £120,000 a year for maintenance with the ones they have. Okay. So I'd like a breakdown of 4 million. Appreciate it's not a simple calculation. It is obviously design and all that. But if we get an understanding what the 4 million, it says around 4 million. Next question, scoring of the schools. Whenever some schools don't get, I was asked about, how did they score? Which is fair enough, but you don't get that. You're not provided that for whatever reason.
So sorry, just to check, you want to find out, just for clarity,
why we can't see the scoring of a school.
Okay.
And there's obviously
once the school has been, or before the school?
Say it didn't get the 20 mile an hour, so there's obviously a matrix or a scoring mechanism, but we can never see that.
Okay.
So say it's a 60 mile an hour. And the third question is SIDS. I personally would prefer SIDS, personally, because I think it's a better impact than a 20 mile an hour flashing light, because it provides the speed you're actually doing. And theoretically, they were 2,800. They're probably guessing around £3,500, £4,000 each. Obviously, need 2 at a school, so it's theoretically cheaper. Theoretically now.
So maybe as well, just to add to that, maybe it would be checking in to see whether the minister is minded to look at what other measures, cost saving wise, in relation. Is that what?
Well, in that report it says that they're thinking of doing more, but not to the biggest extent.
Yes.
But if they put in SIDS, or at least trial SIDS, because I had mentioned this way back 2 years ago to the minister, whatever the minister was at that point. Why don't we trial a SID and prove the speed at a school based on a SID principle and not just a 20 mile an hour?
Okay. 20 mile per hour is the temporary during the school hours,
yes,
and then the SIDS would be. Are you saying the SIDS would be that same time period, or
well,
over
you can't.
that?
I think you can't control SIDS remotely.
No, you can't control.
Yes, exactly.
But there's an issue in there where a lot of 20 mile an hours stated are not going correct times. The department has to change that, and not the school themselves. So there's a wee bit of fors and against both.
Okay. Any other points that members want to raise in relation to that? Okay. Happy enough? Yeah.
Chair, sorry, I do know that the department did release a paper on SIDS and its views on SIDS, which probably gives the rationale for maybe why they're not used a wee bit more extensively.
Well, it says in there that they're looking at SIDS, but it'd be good to know. I'm not having read that paper in full. Does the SIDS are the better, are they more effective?
Yeah.
They're the permanent ones now.
Well, it depends.
Do you know what I mean?
When you can
just give an example, Chair. There's ones down Middletown on the border. Put them in for 3 months. Out of the side, move it from one side of the village to the other.
No, I thought permanent at the time.
So it's permanent stuff we're talking.
But I said it's still the same.
So it's basically a cost benefit analysis of the SIDS.
Based against this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Okay, happy enough?
Yeah.
Okay, item 10 is the Forward Work Programme at page 215 with the draft Forward Work Programme. I'm seeking agreement to proceed with the evidence sessions as set out in the draft Forward Work Programme and to reflect any decisions taken today. Hard to believe we only have 4 evidence sessions now before Christmas, and we've a lot to get through. So item 11, any other business. I'm asking members if they have any other items that they want to raise at this moment in time. Okay, so date, time and location of the next meeting. We will be back in our usual place at 10 a.m. on the Wednesday the 20th of November, and that is in room 29, Parliament Building. So thank you, members. I'll now adjourn the meeting. Thank you.